Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our little egg and greenery tutorial for this month. I have just sketched out on a 5x7 piece of cold pressed 140 cold pressed watercolor paper. Some three little eggs. Well, actually they're kind of large eggs, and just some really light greenery little buds I'm going to be putting in here, and just kind of sketched in some foreground here where I'm going to be adding some grasses and things like that. So I just have these simple shapes, really easy to do, no, overthinking this or anything too complicated. So this will be should be a fairly easy painting tutorial for you guys. So what I'm going to do first is I'm going to be using my number 8 round brush. And I'm just going to start with my eggs. And these can be really any color that you like. No special colors. So I'm just going to grab my wet brush here. And I'm going to be doing my eggs wet on wet, which means I'm wetting my paper first with clean water. And I kind of have this egg sitting a little bit in front of this egg, so it's overlapping him. You really never want ends to end, like touching like that. It's called a tangent, and just, composition wise, it kind of makes it look funny. So you want to either have things overlapping or one behind the other, taller, that kind of thing. So I'm just wetting this egg for right now. Got a little fuzzy there. Okay. And I'm going to use a real pretty, I think, I have a color on my palette called Peacock Blue. And it's a really pretty kind of turquoisey blue. Robin's egg blue, I'm going to say. So I'm just dropping this color in, and it's, pretty loose or watery mixture of paint on my palette. I want to keep everything very loose at this point, and just kind of fill it in, keep it within the egg as best I can. Okay, and then while that is wet, well, actually I'm going to let it sit for just a minute. But while it's wet though, I'm going to wait till it just sits for a minute. I'm going to be dropping in a little bit of brown specks. So it just looks like there's a little bit of coloration, just coloration in the egg. But I'm going to grab a little bit more blue, just a little bit creamier blue. And I'm going to just kind of, while this is all wet, I just want to drop in a little bit darker blue through the bottom here, to give a little different value here in this egg. It's a little bit darker, creamier blue. Okay, I'll let that kind of hang out for a minute and dry a bit, and then I'm going to drop in some hair. I'm going to drop in some little brown specks, and I think I'll use a little bit of burnt sienna for that. It's kind of like a reddish brown, rusty brown color. And I'm just taking a little bit of that burnt sienna on the tip of my brush, and I'm going to just drop in, all while this is still, fairly wet. Just drop in a bunch of little specks. And now I'm just using a damp brush to kind of spread them out a bit. I just want like some texture here in my eggs. Like a little bit more blue paint here and there. just to give a little bit of texture and some life. All right, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to dry that egg because I don't want to paint here or here against my wet egg because it will just then bleed into each other. Let me get my little dryer. So I'm going to dry this egg with my heat gun. It dries pretty fast. So now I won't have any problem with my egg bleeding into my next egg. So I'm going to move up here now and do the same thing with clean water. Just wetting. Be careful, I don't want to really touch this one. I don't want to reactivate it. And I will go back over these, you know, once I kind of go through the painting. Just to, you know, add some more, a little bit of darker value here and there. All right, for this next color, I think I'm going to do a bright kind of golden yellow. It's a new gamboge yellow. And I'm telling you, you can really use any colors you want. If you want to do all blue eggs, that's use your artistic license. So I'm just dropping in. If you want to do all pink, you get it. Just dropping in some of these colors here. You just want to make sure that when you do your painting, that you don't want to have them look flat. And so to help them not look flat, you need to have some lights, you know, some contrast. So they're not just all one value, which means all one like level of color. You got to have some darker areas and some lighter areas within your painting. So what I'm doing here is I'm just lifting out with a clean damp brush a little bit of that yellow just to kind of establish maybe a highlight right up in that part of the egg. And here in my blue one, that's why I dropped in a little bit of darker color here, so it would create a little bit of a lighter color above. So you have a variety of values in your painting, you know, in your eggs and in your painting. All right, I'm going to take a little bit more of that gamboge and I'm going to drop it a little bit darker of it down here where it's kind of sitting behind these other eggs. So it would naturally kind of create a little bit more of a shadow. Doing this all while this egg is still wet. It allows me to get softer edges and have that color just, you know, spread out a little bit more. And it has a little bit of texture. Okay, I'm going to take a little bit of my burnt sienna like I did with the brown egg. And I am going to just drop a few little dots here and there. My burnt sienna. I'm not going to go over the whole egg. Just little bits here and there. Just to give it some texture. Damp brush here. And by using, you know, by using 100% cotton paper, it really, really does make a big difference in your paintings. It allows your paper to stay wetter longer. you get really nicer blends than if you were to use, let's say, like a Canson or the Strathmore papers. I know they're cheaper and they say watercolor paper, but they're really not. They're good for if you want to just practice like brush strokes or color mixes, but to do paintings, you really do want to use 100% cotton paper. It just makes a world of difference in your paintings. Okay, I'm just lifting out here a little bit. So now I'm gonna dry this egg. So sorry for the noise. Okay, I don't like how I have this kind of crispy dark edge around here, and that happens sometimes when you're using too much water. So I'm just going to take a clean damp brush, and I rinse and blot my brush a lot. So I have my towels here, and what I do is I rinse my brush and then really get that excess water off, and then I go over it with the point of my brush just to kind of lift out and soften that. I didn't like that edge I was getting. Okay, that's better. Kind of have it here. But if you don't want a bunch of water on your brush, you really want to make sure you get that excess water off, or you're going to be just really depositing more water in when you're painting. Okay, well, I won't see how I'm kind of reactivating that blue. I'm just trying to blend that out. That's okay, because we're going to go back. I'm going to go back to that. So now these are dry, and a good way to judge if your paintings are dry, if they still feel cool to the touch when you're laying your hand down on it, it's not dry. It needs to feel room temperature, and that's how you can tell that they are dry. All right, let's come on over to this egg and dropping in some water. Just get a nice even layer, no puddles. And I think I'll do a pink one on this one. I'm going to do an opera pink. It's a really bright kind of neon-y pink. It's really, really pretty, but it's very pink. So basically I used my primary colors here, red, blue, yellow. Ooh, you hear that? You have some wild motorcycle running down the street. Okay. So I'm just kind of dropping all that in, just a watery mix on my palette. Just filling it in. Now I'm going to grab a little bit creamier pink and just drop a little bit darker. And since it's a little bit lighter here, like there's a highlight there, that's just for giggles, say the sun's coming this direction. So this part of my egg is going to be a little lighter. This part of my egg is going to be a little bit lighter. And then this part where the sun, let's say, is hitting it. We were doing, a correct kind of painting. So I'm just going to lift out a little bit of color here where my highlight's going to be on my egg. Guess where I'm at. Let me go in with this dry paint. Give a little bit of a lighter, lift out a little bit here too. Okay. So now I'm just going to let this spread around. And don't want to, you know, I'm going to have this anchored down. It's not going to be like floating in the air. Okay. I'll drop a little bit of specks on this egg, just a little. The same little bit of burnt sienna, nothing big. Just a few there and here and there, and maybe even just some plain water onto that drying paint. It just gives it little speckles. They're called blooms, and you can only do this really when your paint is still wet. I could drop, you know, little droplets of water into drying paint, and it creates what we call blooms. So let me add a little bit more pink down here. So it just gives a little bit of fun texture in that egg. Okay, so let me dry this one. Okay, now at this point, what I'm going to do is I'm going to anchor my eggs down just by giving them some greens, like they're sitting in some grass, and you know, so they're not just floating around. I'm just going to use a little bit of sap green, a little bit creamier paint on dry paper here, and I'm just going to go in, and I'm using like the side of my brush here on my dry paper, and I'm going to be getting a little bit of a dry brush effect where it's skipping over, and you can kind of hear it. It's skipping over the texture of my paper. Grab a little bit of water. And I'm just using a little bit of water now just to blend it out a little bit. And I think I will add a little bit of my burnt sienna. So I can drop in a little bit of that as well. Kind of get up in there where it's where they're sitting in the grass, so it's kind of a shadowy look. So a little bit of burnt sienna mixed in with right on that green. Give it a little bit of a rinse. Pull some of that color down. Oh. And then what I'm going to do later is I'm going to be adding some grasses to this. So we're going to let that sit for right now. And now I'm going to come up into my greenery. And this, you know, these are very simple, little loose little paintings, very simple. Don't overthink this. I'm just making, you know, I just drew in some stem marks, some stem lines, and I'm keeping it very loose. No particular leaves or blooms or anything like that. Don't overthink this. You know, I'm going to use maybe some of the pink I used in my egg here just to create little blooms here and there. And I just use, you know, my same brush, and I'm just kind of use the tip and I press down, and it just creates little bud looking blooms. If you want to just do leaves, you can just do green leaves. I mean, really, this is not, you know, don't overthink this. So just making little pink little buds. And I'll add a little bit of my sap green, maybe for some little leaf marks. And I'm just making marks. That's all I'm doing. Just making some mark shapes. No, I'm not doing a botanical painting here. Here and there. I might add a little bit of this egg color. Drop a little bit of that in just some of my blue. I'm sorry, some to my green leaves. Kind of give them a variety of color. You just kind of, I don't want to like introduce a new color now since I have so much color here. I want to keep things harmonized, so I might use a little bit of the yellow, the new gambos that I used in that egg. If I want to put some yellow in here, in little bits of yellow. So you don't want to like use every color in your palette, you know, for this kind of thing. Try to keep things harmonized and color coordinated within your painting. Just makes it aesthetically more pleasing when you're using, you know, all your same colors. Okay, so same thing over here. A little bit of sap green here for a little bit of a stem. Do little leaves here and there. And then a few buds. Just very quick. Don't overthink this part. A little bit of the yellow. And a little bit of the blue. A little bit more green. A few little darker spots here. And then I'm going to darken my few of my buds. Remember, the watercolors, they do dry lighter. Okay. All right, so there's my eggs. I'm going to take a little bit of my peacock blue and make a nice little creamier mixture here on my blue egg. And I'm just on dry paper here. This, even my grass part has dried. I'm just going to kind of come down to the bottom here and layer up. This is what we call glazing, or, you know, layering, and watercolors requires many layers to get those darker values that are needed. So on dry paper, I'm just adding in a little bit more of that blue. Rinse my brush, and now I'm just going to kind of just take a damp brush. I don't want a hard edge there. So I clean and rinse and blot really good. And I'm just going to pull that color up and just fade it out a bit. A bit more blue. Bring some up to the side here a little bit more. And this will also help that light highlighted area stand out even more, because you're putting kind of light against dark. I'm going to just soften this edge. Kind of let it bleed down into that grassy area. Okay. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of my pink, and I'm not worrying that this is wet over here. It's okay. If it blends in a little bit, that's fine. Just adding a little bit more of that darker pink here. On dry paper. And by doing this, you can see it just kind of sits there. Rinse and blot, and then just soften that edge with a damp brush. Kind of pull that color up a bit right in here. Okay, a little bit more of my yellow. Sometimes I get too much water on my brush, and I can feel it when I'm putting it down on my paper. So you just take your brush and just slightly tap the tip to your towel. So I'm trying to keep these very like textured, and I don't want them to be very smooth in one value. Okay, come in a little bit more. My pink here, just kind of brighten these up. You see, I'm just kind of being very random. That's such a pretty pink color. All right, let me do some grasses now on my eggs. So I'm just taking that sap green, and what I'm going to do here, I'll show you my filthy palette. So I have my sap green here, and what I'm going to do is I want to darken it ever so slightly, but I don't want to add a different green or make it, I want to keep within the colors that I've already used in my painting. So the complement to green on the color wheel is red. So if I were to introduce my red, or in this case my opera pink that I used in my painting, it'll dull this green down just ever so slightly. So here's my opera pink right here. I'm just going to take a little bit and mix it in with that green. That might have been a little too much, so let me grab a little more of my green, sap green, and it just will dull it down ever so slightly and give it a different, different green color, so it's not as bright. So anytime you want to dull a color, for example, purple or violet, the complement to purple or violet is yellow. So if I have a really bright purple and I need it to just tone it down a bit, just take an ever so slightly small bit of yellow and add it to that purple, and it tones it right down. So anytime you need to do that, just look on the color wheel, and it gives you the opposite of the color wheel. It's complements, quotes complementary color. It will then tone the color down. So orange and blue, red and green, yellow and violet. So here I'm just making little bits of grass. Wet my brush a little bit on my dry paper, doing little heights, different heights of grasses. Grabbing some more of my paint, just really get it in there. Like this stuff is really sitting here being cushioned in the grass. And different lengths, different angles of your grass. You don't want everything to look like little soldiers, all perfectly straight and tall. Varying heights. And so now I'm just going to take my damp brush and I'm going to soften these bottom edges with a little bit of water. Blend all that out. Back up a little bit more green. Add a little bit more of my burnt sienna. So I'm not introducing any new colors here. I'm just using what I've already used in my painting. And my green. Just straight sap green here. Variety of grass colors. And just making a sweet little egg scene. Nothing too complicated about that. Okay, I might even take a little of my peacock blue, just cause. Drop a little bit of my blue in here. So I know blue and greens all work nicely together. They're analogous colors. I mean, I could get into color theory, but we'd be here for hours, so I'm avoid that. But you know, it is helpful to know a little bit about color theory. It helps to know what colors you can blend together, mix together, and not have an issue where you're going to get mud. Okay, just softening that edge. I feel like I need to be a little bit deeper here. So what I'm going to do is I'll show you what I'm talking about here on my dirty palette again. Even though I did not use any violet in my yellow or in my painting. Here's my little new gamboge. I'm going to find a spot here. I should clean this. I am going to dull that down a little bit by just adding a tiny bit of violet. And that neutralizes it. Gives me more of a bright gray brown. Let me add a little more yellow. So now I have like a really dark kind of golden yellow. And you can adjust it to how you want it. And I'm going to use that color now for a little bit of my shadow. I didn't want to use the blue. That would have made green. And I didn't want to use the pink because that would have made more of an orangey. So I'm just going to kind of stick that right down in here along the edge. As there's a little bit of a shadow there. So I just put a little bit in there. Clean, damp brush. And just blend that out. So it really looks like it's nestled down behind those other eggs. Okay. And there we go. So now, let's see if I can lift out a little bit more of this for a highlight. Now at this point, I'm going to dry my painting. And then I'm going to make sure it's very dry. And then I'm going to seal it with our Mod Podge. And then at that point, I'm going to let it dry completely. And then part 2 will be where we resin this onto a 5x7 panel. So let me dry this. I have to make sure it's really, really dry. Okay, and I will attach this to my panel and then seal it. And hopefully I won't get a lot of bleed with the Mod Podge. I have found that I've been doing those metallic paints on the black, onto the black canvas panels, just painting directly on there with my metallics. And I'm able to pour resin right over top of them without sealing them. So that's something we could try. This is the panel here. And my Mod Podge. Okay, my Mod Podge. I have a brush here and my 5x7 panel. Now, this paper is a little bit bigger, which I do on purpose so that I can then trim. It's better to be too big than not be big enough here. Okay, so I'm going to, do this Mod Podge on my panel. Attach it. Turn this light off. It looks too glary. See if that helps. Turn it down. Okay. So I'm in my painting. I'm going to Mod Podge here. I got some cheap old brushes. Feel like they're going to work better. I'm just attaching this. Got these at Michael's. They're Artist Loft. It's just some synthetic nylon brushes. Get the edges really good. Messy, messy. This would be a nice little Easter gift for somebody. With my hands. Okay. See, blind spot. Okay. Now I just want to line this up Now, if you want to sign yours, do it now. I've been kind of not signing mine. I'm kind of just signing the back. So I'm going to pull this down because I don't want that edge of that grass to, I'm going to be able to cut that white part off. Okay. Now I have found, I don't want to use that scraper. I feel like it's kind of dents my paper because I use this cotton paper and it's very sensitive. And so I've just been pressing down, and I find that when I do this and then I sit a book or something heavy on top, it works much better. So I have these aqua boards. These are watercolor boards that are a little bit heavy. So I'm just going to sit that on there, let it dry for about a good hour, and then I will come back and then seal the top with you guys. And then this will be the part 1. Part 2 will be after that's completely dry. Then I will resin it, put some little bits on it if we decide, and resin it, and then go from there. All right, so I'm going to let this dry for a while, and then I'll be back to seal the top. Okay, I am back, and my paper is nicely attached to my canvas board here. So I'm going to now seal this with the Mod Podge, and so I'm just going to use my same brush, and I'm going to try and be really gentle. I really don't want to smear the paint. Sometimes that happens with this, but I find that this is the best way to seal my paper. I've used sprays before, and they don't leave a nice, even consistency. That's why I come back to this Mod Podge. So, but I have to cover the whole area. I can't just do my painting and then leave this part of the paper exposed because the resin is going to cover the whole thing, and any exposed paper, it will discolor with the resin. So I'm just going to go over the whole thing here, and I'm going to try and stay in one direction. I'm not going to kind of do zigzaggy. I know I'm probably going to have some brush marks, but it's okay. So I'm just going to keep it as nice and even as I can. Kind of go real lightly over my painted part. See, just spreading a little bit. That's okay. Gives it a little bit of something. I'm just trying to be real light here. This is, it's completely dry, but it's watercolor, so it will reactivate a little bit. So I'm going to just try and be as light as I can and still get it covered. If I have to use a few, use extra, that's okay. So it will dry clear. Use extra just so I don't have to press down hard. I'm like barely, look where I'm holding my brush, and I'm barely pressing down at all. And I'm interested also, I would like to try at some point, maybe next time, hot press paper. Now, hot press paper is also 100% cotton, but it is a smooth surface. Like my cold press paper here has some texture to it. so the paint kind of gets in the crevices and gives it some more texture, whereas hot press paper is basically they take the cold press, which what this is, and they press it in a hot plate or something like that and makes it very smooth. So paint kind of sits on top a little bit more. It doesn't absorb down into the paper as quickly. So I would like to try that at some point, you know, maybe a painting on the hot press paper and see if that makes a difference with sealing it like this. Okay, so I think I'm good. I think I got a good amount on here. Just make sure, even though I'm going to be cutting these edges off. I probably should have did that before I sealed this. That's okay. Okay. Yeah, I think I got it all covered. Oh, maybe there's a spot here. So I look down, you know, I kind of lean down and to the side to see if there's any paper exposed, but I think I'm good. All right, so at this point now, this really has to dry, you know, completely. And I know it looks really covered in the screen here. I did have a little bit of bleed here, a little bit of bleed here, but that's okay. I'm not going to touch it. My eggs look good, and the rest of this looks good. So that's all it bled, and we're okay. All right, so I'm going to let this dry now. And then in part 2, I will be maybe adding some glitter here and there, and then pouring the resin. So, all right, have a great rest of the day, and I'll see you in part 2.